Tonight, a declaration to put European boots on the ground in Ukraine if a peace deal is reached. The security statement signed tonight in Paris is described as a significant step towards ending Russia's invasion and determining what happens after.
The UK and France will establish military hubs across Ukraine and build protected facilities for weapons and military equipment to support Ukraine's defensive needs.
Each day a little bit closer. It's still not enough to have a peace.
Also, the White House says Donald Trump and his team are discussing options to take over Greenland, but not everyone in the Arctic island is opposed.
He will come. He's decided, Nobody can change his mind, I know. I can feel that, but I think it's not bad.
And I'm Mark Austin in Colombia, another country that fears being America's next target. President Gustavo Petro says he'll take up arms if the US invades in response to Donald Trump's threats of military action similar to Venezuela. Still, Venezuelans are crossing into Colombia, fleeing fear and uncertainty after leader Nicolas Maduro was snatched and flown to the US.
Also, China has accused the US of behaving like a world judge for taking Maduro. But beyond words, are we seeing the limits of Beijing's influence? All that is ahead on The World with me, Yalda Hakim. Good evening and welcome to the programme. We begin with the breaking news that Ukraine's allies have signed off on security guarantees for the country in the event of a peace deal. That is a huge caveat, but nonetheless, this is a significant moment in a war that started with Russia's invasion almost 4 years ago. The meeting in Paris was hosted by the so-called Coalition of the Willing, led by Britain and France. It involved US envoy Steve Witkoff and Donald Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner. It was announced that they'd provide Ukraine with equipment and training and back them up with air, land and sea support. The aim to deter any future Russian attack. Have a listen.
This is a vital part of our iron-cast commitment to stand with Ukraine for the long term. It paves the way for the legal framework under which British, French and partner forces could operate on Ukrainian soil, securing Ukraine's skies and seas and regenerating Ukraine's armed forces for the future. We discussed these issues in detail today, and so I can say that following a ceasefire, the UK and France will establish military hubs across Ukraine and build protected facilities for weapons and military equipment to support Ukraine's defensive needs.
We have really very good dialogue with American side, thanks again, Steve and Jared. So we really have good steps forward. Yes, 90%, but we are each day a little bit closer. It's still not enough to have a peace, because enough when the war will finish, will end in Ukraine, we still have losses. So it's still not enough.
President Zelensky ending that statement. Let's bring in our Europe correspondent, Alistair Bunkle, who joins us from Paris this evening. And, the point that President Zelensky making there was this war needs to end for these security guarantees, which are significant, come into effect, because it is, frankly, the first time that the United States has publicly backed something like this.
Yeah, I felt tonight was pretty significant. The Coalition of the Willing, as it's described, has met on a number of occasions, never kind of in this format, never in person in so many numbers. And they've been criticised, I think, to be honest, quite fairly for being sometimes an ineffective diplomatic talking shop. But tonight, there was substance. There was this agreement, this memorandum of intent by France and Britain to put their forces into Ukraine in the event of a ceasefire. And that is partly what Ukrainians were looking for. They were looking for security guarantees. If it's not membership of NATO, then something to assure them that if they agreed to a ceasefire with Russia, Russia wouldn't just use a period of time to rebuild its forces, rearm, and then have another go at Ukraine. So this is part of that reassurance, and it comes crucially as well with an American backstop. The Americans don't want to put their troops on the ground in Ukraine. The Americans don't want to be, under President Trump, the world's policeman. They want the Europeans to step up to protect another European country. So that is exactly what Britain and France are trying to demonstrate. But the Americans are saying that, you know, in an extreme situation were Russia to invade again, then they would be there to support Ukraine. So that is kind of music to the ears, if you like, for President Zelensky. But it only comes into force if there is a ceasefire. And there is a long way to go to get that ceasefire. And there's talk of being 90% there, but the last 10% is always the hardest to get to. And part of that 10%, a large chunk of that 10% yet to be resolved, is land concessions. President Putin wants to take the entire Donbass, some of which is still occupied by Ukrainian forces. President Zelensky doesn't want to give him any of it. But somewhere, if there's going to be a ceasefire, the two sides will need to give ground, both literally and figuratively, and concede in order to find peace.
Yeah, I mean, frankly, there are going to have to be uncomfortable compromises made to reach some kind of settlement from both sides. And we're yet to see and hear what the Russians have to say on this. But Alistair, I just want to sort of shift your focus slightly, because frankly, this whole thing could have been overshadowed by the entire Greenland fiasco. And yet it seemed like leaders there wanted to park that for the moment and focus on Ukraine tonight.
So I think kind of this morning, or let's say around lunchtime, when leaders were starting to arrive, you know, the big geopolitical story, amazingly, was not Ukraine, but was the threat that America would take over Greenland, either using military force or diplomatic pressure, repeated threats from Donald Trump and some of his senior aides that was what America wanted, it was America's right, and it was what America was going to do. And so, you know, the assumption was that that would overshadow everything that was going on here. You had the Europeans who released a pretty robust statement, it has to be said, hours before the meeting started, and two senior US officials, Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner, in Paris, in the same room as Mette Frederiksen, the Danish Prime Minister, who was also here today. But I think ultimately, and I think the sense I and others got from that press conference, was that they successfully managed to separate the two geopolitical issues and to say today was about Ukraine. Greenland is another very big pressing issue that needs some diplomatic lightness of touch, but also some firm language in order to persuade Donald Trump away from it. But that's for another day. That's for another conversation. And I think they managed to do that pretty successfully, I've got to be honest.
Yeah, I guess as much as they wanted to avoid it, we've just seen another statement come out of the White House, which we'll be discussing. But Ali, thanks so much for bringing us up to date there. Well, joining me now is Matthew Saville, who is the Director of Military Sciences at the Royal United Services Institute. Thank you so much. Matthew, good to see you again. I just want to get your assessment on the developments this evening. There are these caveats. Of course, we have to wait and see if a deal can actually be struck. But this is a significant moment, especially with the United States for the first time, it appears, publicly backing a coalition of allies supporting Ukraine in this way.
Yes, good evening. I was going to say something very similar to that which Alistair said, which is that there is positive news here and some progress in the development of the coalition of the willing, but there are probably three sets of challenges that remain. The first is the big one. This is a post-ceasefire arrangement, and if we don't get to a ceasefire, and this doesn't make one more likely, then this just remains a paper exercise, although obviously there's been a lot of work gone into the planning, and so there is a lot of pressure on the US to effectively make this a condition of the deal that they are, if you like, negotiating above Ukraine's heads. That brings us on to the second point, which is, do we think that the US guarantees, which now appear here for the first time in more detail, are credible? And then finally, what are the capabilities that the Europeans will bring to bear, and how many countries are prepared to be part of the so-called reassurance force, the multinational force that goes in, and how long can that be sustained for? Because I think it would be a pretty disastrous state of affairs if we got all the way to that point and then discovered it could only be maintained in country for a relatively short period.
Yeah, Matthew, I'm just going to have our audiences listen to what Jared Kushner, Donald Trump's son-in-law and one of the chief negotiators in all of this from the United States side, has been saying. Let's just have a listen.
This does not mean that we will make peace, but peace would not be possible without the progress that was made here today, meaning that if Ukraine is going to make a final deal, they have to know that after a deal, they are secure, they have obviously a robust deterrence, and there's real backstops to make sure that this will not happen again.
So Jared Kushner there talking about those security guarantees, that backstop. But we'll have to wait and see what the Russians actually say, what their response to this is, because, everyone's talking about the fact that this is all good and well. These security guarantees are important, but we actually need a deal first.
Yes, and what you've heard there is a description of how they are persuading the Ukrainian side of the equation in terms of any potential compromises on those original 20 points. Although, as we heard from Zelensky, they haven't agreed all of those yet, and I imagine territory is the issue. What now has to happen is they need to go back to the Russian side of the equation, and on that score, there is going to need to be sustained, if not more, work on pressuring the shadow fleet, on sustaining current military supplies going to the Ukrainians. I think that's why we heard air defense is being mentioned by Zelensky. They need to somehow incentivize the Russians to negotiate in good faith, if such a thing is possible, or at least to make them recognize that they cannot continue to make military progress without there being real consequences.
Matthew, how seriously do you think the Russians are taking these talks? Often we hear phrases like, they have the watchers, we have all the time in the world, we're not going anywhere, this is our backyard, this is our sphere of influence. When I've spoken to Russians, they've described what we're seeing today even and previous conferences and summits as sort of theatre and everyone running around and declaring things, but actually they haven't agreed to anything as yet.
I mean, I'm no Kremlinologist, and it's difficult for me to get into their heads in terms of current thinking. It looks to me like they have done enough in terms of engaging with President Trump, engaging with Steve Witkoff on the negotiations to keep things ticking along, all the while they continue to pound Ukrainian civilian targets. I think the issue is that their reserves of strength, of materiel, of people are not infinite. They are not 10 feet tall. They are advancing tremendously slowly at great cost. But they still seem to be calculating they can spin this out and pay that price because they think they can outlast international support for Ukraine. In that respect, maybe this does put a bit more pressure on, but I think they will need to feel convinced that the US is really going to weigh in to force their hand, because otherwise I think they will continue to take that gamble that they can press on without suffering more pain than they already are, and which they would claim that they can keep going for just a bit longer than the Ukrainians can.
Matthew Seville, thank you so much for joining us this evening on the programme.
My pleasure.
Well, before the declaration, there was concern that tensions over Greenland might hold back progress. Several, though, not all of those meetings in Paris backed a joint statement that the Arctic island belongs to its people. But in breaking development tonight, the White House says President Trump and his team are discussing a range of methods for acquiring the Danish territory. Our US correspondent David Blevins reports from Washington.
Stars, stripes and sound bites. I do love that song, but we got to get to business.
The commander-in-chief still revelling in the ousting of the Venezuelan president.
It was an amazing military feat that took place yesterday. Think of it, an amazing military. It was so complex. 152 airplanes, many. Talk about boots on the ground. We had a lot of boots on the ground. But it was amazing. And think of it, nobody was killed. And on the other side, a lot of people were killed. Unfortunately, I say that, soldiers.
Buoyed by the military operation in Caracas, Donald Trump has turned his attention to Greenland. His Deputy Chief of Staff, Stephen Miller, claiming no one would stop them seizing it.
The United States should have Greenland as part of the United States. There's no need to even think or talk about this in the context that you're asking of a military operation. Nobody's going to fight the United States militarily over the future of Greenland.
In a joint statement, America's European allies pointed out that the Kingdom of Denmark, including Greenland, is part of NATO. Greenland belongs to its people, they added, and it's for them only to decide matters.
NATO would lose its meaning if there were conflicts or aggressive steps within the pact. We are very keen to ensure that any disputes or discussions are resolved through friendly dialogue between NATO members.
Trump's audience didn't hear anything new on domestic policy, the economy or healthcare, but he did exude confidence, impersonating a female weightlifter who was beaten by a transgender opponent.
When she gets it, dropped the thing.
Sharing his wife's thoughts on his dancing.
She hates when I dance. I said, everybody wants me to dance. Darling, it's not presidential.
Even mimicking the French president's accent.
Emmanuel. You know Emmanuel Macron? I love the French accent. Emmanuel. No. I don't know that.
Donald Trump was addressing Republican members of Congress at the start of this midterm election year. But some of those attending the retreat fear the president is in retreat from his America First policy, focusing too much on foreign affairs. He knows, though, that his greatest battle yet could be at the polls in November.
You got to win the midterms, because if we don't win the midterms, it's just going to be, they'll find a reason to impeach me. I'll get impeached.
From the dance floor to the House floor, he'll need a few moves to retain his majority on Capitol Hill.
And David joins me live now from Washington. And David, just in the last 20 minutes or so, or perhaps it was more, we have seen a statement come out of the White House where Donald Trump's advisors say they're discussing options for acquiring Greenland. And an interesting part of this statement is that they've said that the US military is always an option.
That's right, Yalda. 1 year into this presidency, we've grown used to asking what's he going to say next. And I think today's speech was fairly colourful, to say the least. But we are absolutely in the territory where we're asking what's he going to do next. Tomorrow it will be a year since Donald Trump held a press conference at Mar-a-Lago in Florida when he floated for the first time the idea of taking Greenland. Now, no one really took it seriously a few days before his inauguration, but they are taking it seriously off the back of what happened in Venezuela at the weekend, with the White House now confirming that the president and his team are seriously discussing acquiring Greenland and that utilising the US military is always an option. In a statement to the Reuters news agency, they said President Trump has made it well known that acquiring Greenland is a national security priority of the United States, and it's vital to deter our adversaries in the Arctic region. The president and his team are discussing a range of options to pursue this important foreign policy goal, they state. And of course, utilising the US military is always an option at the commander-in-chief's disposal. That is a statement that will cause serious concern in Greenland, in Denmark, and for all of those European allies who've said these things need to be discussed within the context of NATO.
Yeah, and David, I guess whilst we're reflecting on the past year and frankly, even Trump 1.0, you know, the fact is when Donald Trump says he's going to do something, often we're told, well, he doesn't literally mean it. But, you know, he laid out a lot of this in his national security strategy about 4 weeks ago, about, you know, wanting more influence over the Western Hemisphere. Here we are 4 weeks on into the new year, and he's very much making it clear what the direction of travel is and what the priority is for him and his administration going forward.
Yes, and it's even difficult sometimes, Yalda, to know who exactly within his base he's pitching at, because there are those within the Make America Great movement who believe by focusing on the Middle East or on Ukraine or on Venezuela or now even on Greenland, the president is making America great again. He's protecting the United States. But there are others within that base, of course, who feel he should be now focusing firmly on domestic issues like the economy and healthcare and housing, because those are the things American voters are talking about in this midterm election year. It's very difficult to find common ground between Republicans and Democrats on the Hill over those issues, not least because of what happened on this very day 5 years ago when protesters stormed the Capitol in resistance of the ratification of the election results that saw Joe Biden elected to the White House. You could argue that that was the lowest point for Donald Trump, and 5 years later we see him at the highest point, arguably, where he appears to be giving off this air of confidence, domination really, where he can do whatever he likes and is confident it's not going to affect his ability to hold on to his majority when America goes to the polls again in November.
Yeah, we'll have to see how that unfolds. David, thank you so much. So President Donald Trump is doubling down on his territorial ambitions for Greenland, despite warnings that his plans could destroy NATO. Mostly covered by a giant ice cap, Greenland is the world's largest island that's not a continent. It's part of the Kingdom of Denmark, but mostly looks after its own affairs, apart from foreign and security policy matters, which Copenhagen controls. Its entire population of 57,000 could fit inside Wembley Stadium, with room for 30,000 more. The sole US military presence in Greenland is here, the Pituffik Space Base. American troops have been stationed there since the Second World War, playing an essential role in missile detection. Let's go to Greenland live now, where we can speak to our international affairs editor, Dominic Waghorn. Dom, I mean, every minute of these developments seems more extraordinary. And now this statement coming out of the White House saying they're looking for ways in which they can acquire Greenland. The military option is on the table as well. I mean, Donald Trump in the past has flagged this. He even flagged this during his first term. But frankly, Europeans seem to be taking this incredibly serious now.
That's right, Yalda. I mean, it's been an extraordinary day. If you can hear the sound of explosions, that's not the Greenlanders repelling an American invasion yet. That's actually them celebrating Epiphany, as they do with fireworks every year. But it has been an extraordinary day. To take a step back, let's think what's happened today. Almost every European nation has lined up to support an ally, a member of the EU, a member of NATO, explicitly and specifically because that ally has been threatened by not an enemy, but also an ally, also a member of NATO, because America's President Donald Trump has repeatedly and will not stop threatening Greenland. The European leaders who have managed to sort of pussyfoot and prevaricate around what America has done in Venezuela felt they had to try and draw a line over what he's saying about Greenland, which is that America feels it has to, at some point, take it over. Despite that, we've heard from the White House in response and following that, acting as if that extraordinary statement, which I think really marks a new low. You can't really overstate it, a new low in transatlantic relations. Never have we seen that before. Never has Europe lined up to try and defend an ally against the threat from America. And despite all that, the White House has come out today kind of as if that didn't happen and said, yes, we're considering taking Greenland. We regard it as a national security priority that we take over Greenland. So we're in uncharted territory. It's quite extraordinary. And as far as the Greenlanders and the Danes, who are their kind of overlords, if you like, feel, this is completely unnecessary. America does not need to invade or annex Greenland, either for national security reasons or for mineral resources reasons. They have one base here, as you said, but also under a treaty in 1951 signed with the Danes, they can have as many bases as they want here, and so they can put in as many troops as they want and secure it as much as they would like to. They can also line up and try and extract the minerals that many other countries and companies are trying to do here. The challenge isn't that it's hard to get concessions here, it's just that it's very difficult to get minerals out of the ground because of the Arctic conditions here. They don't need to invade Greenland to do either of those things, and yet Donald Trump is persistently talking about this. So we've talked to Greenlanders, and obviously, as you can imagine, there's sort of mixed opinions. The overwhelming majority of Greenlanders are very, I would say, angry and upset and offended that their allies continue to be quite so aggressive and rapacious about their country. But there are a few, and the clips we're going to play you now are led by one of them, Jürgen Boersen, who's like leading the minority, who actually would welcome the Americans making a move on Greenland. And actually, he knows members of the Trump family, and he's saying that he believes it is going to happen.
He will come. He's decided, nobody can change his mind, I know. I can feel that, but I think it's not bad. It's a new opportunity for us, It is, I know Don Jr., I knew Charlie Kirk, I know his closest friend, and they have been very kind to us, Europeans are now talking about to send some troops to Greenland. It will be bad if Europeans sending a troop to Greenland. I just think, okay, just let the American come and let us negotiate. What is it the American want? We cannot deny them.
Stay away from Greenland. Yeah.
And does it worry you what he's saying about taking over?
No. I'm not worried, but I don't want Trump here.
And do you think after Venezuela, maybe he will try and take Greenland next?
Maybe. You never know with Trump.
Some views there from Greenland people talking to you there today, Dom. But, it really is a tricky balancing act for the Europeans. On the one hand, they're seeing Venezuela unfold and they're cautious about condemning that and talking about international law and what that means, that kind of move means, and whether international law has been violated. And on the other hand, they're trying to be tough on the Greenland situation. So it is quite a difficult balancing act because they also understand they're still reliant on the United States when it comes to things like providing security guarantees to Ukraine.
Yeah, I think the overriding priority for them is that still, whatever Donald Trump does, that he is not angered and offended enough to walk away from Ukraine. He has walked away in the sense that he's not supplying weapons or financial aid to the Ukrainians, but he is still selling weapons to the Ukrainians or to the Europeans who are then sending them on to the Ukrainians. And the big fear remains that he eventually walks away and takes military intelligence away in terms of support for Ukraine, and still Europe is not able to fill that vacuum. That would leave the Ukrainians high and dry and would be very, very difficult, I think, for the Ukrainians were he to do so. I think, there is a kind of expectation that may happen at some point, and the Europeans hope that when it does, they're going to be able to fill in that and make up for that deficit. But until that happens, they still have to be careful about what they do with Donald Trump. They know he's an irascible maverick, an erratic president, and they don't want to offend him. But they feel that when it comes to, obviously, an American president directly threatening a member of NATO, then they have to draw a line. I think the fear is that it has come too late. And to hear Mette Frederiksen, the right-wing Danish Prime Minister yesterday saying that if this happens, and she is taking Donald Trump very seriously because of what he says, then effectively it is the end of NATO. If a NATO country attacks or acquires or seizes or takes a part of the territory of another NATO member against its will, then the alliance is effectively over. And I think the big fear is, and the realisation is, that given what we've heard from Donald Trump over the last year and his first 4 years in office, he may not care that much about the Western alliance. He may feel that his interests here supersede that, even though many people would say it's not going to give America everything that he would hope for. And if he is prepared to sacrifice that and make a move on Greenland, well, it's the end of the alliance, but also there's nothing really here to stop him doing so. So we're into perilous territory for the alliance and very difficult diplomatic territory for the European allies.
Yeah, indeed. We'll be watching this space. Dom, thanks so much for all of your reporting. You're watching The World with me, Yalda Hakim. Still to come on the programme, could Colombia be among Donald Trump's next targets? We'll be live with my colleague Mark Austin at the country's border with Venezuela.
The best thing about being a Sky News journalist? I'm going to take you behind the scenes here for Election Night Live. They have gone up and up. Being a Sky News journalist. Ed Conway, Sky News, is anyone going to talk to us? Mortgage rates did go up very sharply during your time in office. Here it is. First off, just the scale of what we're looking at. Our data shows it's been happening. Question is, why it hasn't been stopped.
Well, just days after US forces raided Venezuela's capital and took away leader Nicolas Maduro, a war of words is building between the US and Venezuela's neighbour, Colombia. Well, let's go straight to my colleague Mark Austin, who joins us live from Colombia, not very far from Venezuela's border. And Mark, frankly, with so much of the region now on edge, you know, there is concern that Colombia could be in Donald Trump's sights.
Yes, good evening from Cucuta, where, as you were saying, Yalda, tensions are running pretty high. There is really, as you say, huge concern here. Donald Trump has already called Colombia's president a sick man who runs cocaine mills. There's no evidence, by the way, that Gustavo Petro is involved in the drugs trade, and he has vowed to take up arms now if America attacks. Over the border, though, much more uncertainty still in Venezuela. Many are taking their chances to cross over here into Colombia. I've been speaking to some of them.
On the streets of Caracas today, supporters of ex-President Maduro came out in big numbers. The regime still very much in control here. In the blue at the centre of this picture, Diosdado Cabello, the powerful interior minister, also wanted by the United States. He was out after dark last night too, this time with armed police chanting their allegiance to Maduro. So far not appearing on these streets are opposition protesters, although from outside the country, the opposition leader, Maria Machado, hailed the US military operation.
In January 3rd will go down in history as the day justice defeated a tyranny. It's a milestone, and it's not only huge for the Venezuelan people and our future, I think it's a huge step for humanity, for freedom and human dignity.
Many people in Caracas say they just want to get on with their lives.
What most people want, so to speak, is peace and stability in our country.
The problem isn't changing things. The problem is changing people's mindset. We are all in the same boat. So if we all follow the same path, we can get out of this decline.
The queue to get out of Venezuela, though, is a long and chaotic one. More families seeking refuge in Colombia, desperately worried about what will come next in their country. Maduro may have gone, but the uncertainty and the fear certainly has not. On bus and foot, Direlis has travelled for 15 hours to reach the border. With her, 10-year-old Susie. It is all about her, says her mother. I want a better future for her. People feel fear and dread about everything that's happening, she told me. All we think about is leaving the country now. Fear too now on the Colombia side of the border. And this is why. The cocaine trade is next in Trump's sights. Colombia produces around 2/3 of the world's cocaine supply, and the coca fields here now cover an area twice the size of London. Trump has called Colombia's president a sick guy. And in response, Gustavo Petro has said he would respond militarily to any attack. So once again, as the Americans see it, the problem is drugs. They're convinced that much of the cocaine produced here finds its way across borders like this one, through Venezuela, and then out to the wider world, including the United States and Europe. The Colombians argue they're doing all they can to stop the production of cocaine. This stallholder on the Colombian side of the border says there is great concern about what Trump will do next. Of course, I'm afraid. As a Colombian citizen and a man of my age, I'm obviously frightened of American intervention here. What could happen? The possible deaths. It is worrying, especially here at the border, he tells me. Many Venezuelans are crossing into Colombia to fill suitcases and bags with medicines and other supplies. They will return to a country on edge, where right now, the future is impossible to predict.
Well, the journalist Rosali Hernandez joins me now from the capital of Venezuela, Caracas, and thank you very much for being with us once again. So I watched many Venezuelans, Rosalie, coming across the border into where we are, into Colombia. Why is there such fear now that Maduro has gone?
Well, thank you once again. Let me tell you something. As we have been speaking all these days, there is something that we need to remember. There is not only Nicolás Maduro. Nicolás Maduro was one of the weakest arms in this structure. You know, there is a more powerful man that represents a lot of more fear than Nicolás Maduro. That is Diosdado Cabello. And it also is Jorge Rodriguez. Both faces are the one who has all the repression on them. So I think the Venezuelans think the once Nicolás Maduro left the country, the things in here are going to get a little worse, because when these things happens in Venezuela, you can see all the consequences are on the Venezuelans, not on the external agents. So I think the Venezuelans right now can't feel safe, can't feel hopeful that we are going to walk through a new way to achieve democracy. So I think what is coming next is that we are going to see a lot of more repression. We could see that yesterday the 14 journalists were detained, and the Caracas were under the paramilitary forces control. Under the paramilitary control, so we can feel in Venezuelans world there is more concern than happiness or calm, or I don't know, a joyful feeling about this. I think they are very worried.
And just briefly, if you have these powerful figures that you mentioned at the beginning there, how long could Delcy Rodriguez survive in power, do you think?
Well, there's also a really complex situation to analyze, because Delcy Rodriguez is a really important person, and in all the strategy, diplomatic strategy. While that happens, they need someone to keep control inside the country. So I think they are really well structured. I don't think the Nicolás Maduro I don't think the Nicolás Maduro when I'm so sorry that something else distracted me. When Nicolás Maduro was in here, the situation was almost the same. You know, everybody has their place in that structure. Delcy Rodriguez is with alone Jorge Rodriguez. They are the ones that are in charge of all the negotiations and the dialogue. But the other hand, there is Nicolás Maduro, Diosdado Cabello, and Vladimir Pradino Lopez taking control of all national forces, national security forces. So I don't think that without that pieces in any threat, the situation is going to remain the same. So if the only way that we can be sure that the situation is going to change is leaving not only Nicolás Maduro, but also Diosdado Cabello, Vladimir Pradino Lopez, and all the structure who commands the national forces, the national security forces, the Armada, the Civil, and all the structure who maintains that power and maintains Delcy Rodriguez protected. So I don't think we are going to see a really great change in the next month.
All right, Rosalie, thank you very much again for being with us. I'm joined now by Thor Halvorsen, Chief Executive of the Human Rights Foundation. Thank you very much for being with us. Repression will increase, Rosalie was saying there. What have you been hearing about the human rights situation since the capture of Maduro?
Well, thank you for having me on. I'm in full agreement with everything that Rosalie has said so far. The man in charge of the country is Diosdado Cabello, the Minister of the Interior, who has a $25 million price on his head. And Delcy Rodriguez's government is not going to last. It is an interim government that is on a collision course, because the conditions for her are to hand over and neutralized Diosdado Cabello and Vladimir Padrino Lopez. And the reason that Maduro lost the election is because Delcy Rodriguez and her brother, head of the National Assembly, because nepotism in Venezuela is rife, they were supposed to be in charge of the fraud, and they failed. And so Diosdado Cabello warned them and said, we should not have elections. He despises them. He has now been sidelined. And yet you featured him in a celebration, or rather a celebration of him, which was a support of Maduro. I was surprised that you also, it would seem from your report that Venezuelans are supporting Maduro, when the reality is they're not. There is celebration in the homes. People are very happy that this is over, but Venezuelans are very intuitive after so much repression that we have lived through. It's one of the most repressive countries. It's certainly the most repressive in the Western Hemisphere. And so what we're seeing right now is there's tremendous amounts of stress, both physical and political. There are shortages, there are blackouts. People do not know what's going to happen next, but they do know that the regime is wounded and the myth of invincibility has come to an end. There have been, Rosalie talked about 14 journalists arrested. In fact, one of them was deported. 13 of them were foreign journalists. One of them was national. And all of these arrests occurred during her swearing in. In addition, Venezuela still has 830 some political prisoners, of which more than 150 of them are members of the armed forces. In the last 2 days, 40 people have been arrested, and they include members of the armed forces, policemen, and regular people who are posting things online. The moment that Delcy Rodriguez frees those people, because that's one of the conditions given by the US government, it is going to be very difficult when they decide to speak up and freedom of expression is restored. What is she going to do? Rearrest them?
Right. So
meanwhile,
sorry to interrupt you, but we've only got a limited amount of time. Just very briefly, what you seem to be saying in the report, by the way, I was making the point that the regime is very much still in control, or the remnants of the regime, hence these demonstrations. But you think there's trouble ahead, you think there's factional fighting ahead, and do you think the United States might have to come back in, as they have warned?
well, they have warned that there may be a second strike. And the president of the United States has said that what he will do to Delcy Rodriguez is far worse than what has been done to Maduro. And Maduro is in prison. I presume that that means it's something worse than prison. This government is not going to last. And there is, like in these criminal systems, because Venezuela is not a country that had a drug cartel. The drug cartel has a country, and the drug cartel still functions. And Delcy Rodriguez is high up in the drug cartel. She was also the head of the SEBIN, the feared intelligence police. So people are putting her as a moderate. The New York Times refers to her as a moderate, which is embarrassing. She's been head of the torture in Venezuela. So what is clear is this is not going to last very long. The United States will probably have to step in again. And Diosdado Cabello runs the country, one of the most dangerous men in that country, and a man with very, very little to lose at this point.
Yeah, and as you say, with a bounty on his head. Thor Halvorsen, I appreciate you coming on. Thank you very much. So there we are, a pretty bleak picture, Yalda. Certainly he is predicting more trouble ahead in Venezuela, and as I say, huge concern here because they think that this could be, because of the drug issue, the massive cocaine production here, this could be another target. You've talked about Greenland. Well, Colombia feels it could be a target too.
Yeah, and there's just so much uncertainty, and clearly every one of these states on edge. Thanks so much, Mark, for all of your reporting. You're watching The World with me, Yalda Hakim. Still to come on the programme, we'll take a look at what the capture of Venezuela's ousted leader, Nicolas Maduro, means for China and whether or not Donald Trump has exposed the limits of Beijing's reach.
We're rolling. I'll tell you on another day on the podcast what that was all about.
Welcome to the world.
Come along for the journey. It'll be fun.
Russia knows our weaknesses, but do you? This is the war game.
There were a number of armed security.
We want to discover, to find out what's really going on.
Everything you need to know about British politics in about 20 minutes.
I actually don't like political drama.
So, where next?
Available wherever you get your podcasts.
It's like a football final with only one team on the pitch. This isn't just a call to vote, but a call to remember. The freedom fought for by the African National Congress. I'm Yusra Al-Bagher, Sky's Africa correspondent based in Johannesburg, South Africa. A cyclone and 2 burst dams wiped out hundreds of generational homes. This was the second dam that the floodwaters hit before it tore into Derna. We are in the heart of Nairobi, and we're watching as protesters were heavily tear-gassed.
The sheer fearlessness and persistence of these guys is astonishing.
We help you understand the world with us. I remember going into the iconic Durman market in the heart of Sudan's capital for the first time since the war started. And this is what's left of it. Bullet holes through buildings, shelled balconies, bullet cases on the floor. I witnessed the complete destruction of a place linked to my childhood memories and the lives of millions of people. This is insane. This was a bustling residential area. So many friends who lived here. My most memorable interview was with a 15-year-old boy who'd survived being stranded on a migrant boat on its way from Senegal to the Canary Islands.
After 13 days, our food, water, and fuel supply ran out.
I felt awe when we saw the mountain gorillas in Rwanda.
We call him the king of the jungle. This is the alpha silverback.
Sky News. Get the full story first. Yusra Al-Bagher, Sky News.
What's the best thing about being a Sky News presenter?
We've done the work and the reading, so you don't have to.
Being a Sky News presenter.
Hello and welcome. Westminster, the heart of British politics.
I'm so sorry about what happened to you.
So what on earth is going on?
It's not true.
Can I tell you what I think? It's really unusual. Mornings with Roger and Frost. Let's crack on. Let's get started.
What's the best thing about being a Sky News journalist?
Who's funnier?
Being a Sky News journalist. A special edition of The World with me, Yalda Hakim.
Pakistan had the right to respond.
You're like, what?
A historic day here today. Congratulations, this is a huge moment. But what happens now? China has been one of Venezuela's closest friends and biggest customers, and while Beijing has expressed outrage about the US snatching Nicolas Maduro away, will it go any further? Well, I'm joined now by the contributing editor at The Times and Sunday Times, Cindy Yu. Thank you very much, Cindy, for joining us here on the programme. You know, other than condemnation, given the close ties and influence that China had over Venezuela and the close personal ties, frankly, that Nicolas Maduro and Xi Jinping shared, do you think this exposes Beijing's limitations?
I don't think it really does, because I think, as with many of China's international relationships, they talk a big game, but actually in reality it's very asymmetrical and unsentimental. So what Venezuela gave China was another source of oil, but whereas China was Venezuela's biggest customer, for China, Venezuela was just 4% of its oil imports. So that asymmetrical relationship is something we have to bear in mind. The other thing is that China's foreign relationships are always rhetorically very, very warm, but China doesn't want to have the kind of military burdens, let's put it that way, that America as a global policeman has historically had with its allies across the world. So it will be watching and seeing what happens next. I think the fact that Delcy Rodriguez, the Maduro's vice president, is taking over will be reassuring to some, because that means in some ways it's business as usual. And even Trump himself on Saturday suggested that he would be continuing to sell China Venezuelan oil. When he was asked about it, he said, well, we're in the oil business. That doesn't sound like a total cutting off of China to me, although I appreciate that some in his administration, like Marco Rubio, may have different things in mind. But I do think that it's a waiting and watching game.
Yeah, indeed. And I guess the other concern that's been raised, Cindy, is what happens with Taiwan. And obviously, China isn't basing its calculus on what happens in Venezuela is how it will determine what happens in Taiwan. I mean, for China, as you know, reunification is a domestic issue and they will do it in their own time. But do you think they're looking at the situation and thinking it's a bit of a playbook for them?
Yalda, you're totally right in the sense that Taiwan is one of China's so-called core interests. So what it does there, international law has never really had much influence on. If China thought it could take Taiwan without much of a cost, if it thought it was a net benefit, then it would do that. So far, it's because its army hasn't been strong enough to do that, or because the economic sanctions have been, theoretically too great, perhaps even the risk to the CCP's legitimacy itself. No amount of American actions will change that calculus in elsewhere, as it were. But I think what it does do is give China more moral authority across the world. When China next threatens Taiwan, or when the West next criticizes China for threatening Taiwan, in this sphere of the international relations, on the stage of third countries, developing world, China will have much more moral authority to do that kind of thing, or at least not as much of a hit from the criticisms from the West, because the teeth of that will be gone. Who are the West to criticize this kind of thing if Trump can go out and do that to Venezuela? So it depends on how much you think that reputational boon matters, but you're totally right in that it won't change any actual calculus there.
Cindy, really fascinating talking to you. Thank you so much for joining us here on the programme. And that's it for tonight. We're back tomorrow from 9 p.m. Sky News at 10 is next. Bye for now.
The best thing about being a Sky News journalist?
They call him the king of the jungle.
Being a Sky News journalist.
Yusra Al-Baghir has this report.
And this is what's left of it.
As a woman of colour, how did the Harris campaign speak to you?
People risk their lives to speak to us for this report.
Mr. Zuma, Sky News.